Hey guys, this is Anirvan saying, hope you guys are staying healthy and safe in whatever part of the world you're in. Welcome to another episode of Fifth Grove Insights. Today's topic is yet another interesting topic that we picked up for the M&A Stories. As many of you know, M&A integration is a complex maneuver, and many a times there are always issues with respect to the handover of responsibilities from one company to another. And our topic today is one of those elements that are linked deeply with the handover, and that's the reporting structure. And to talk about that, we're going to be joined by our guest, Aaron Wheating. Hey, Aaron, welcome to our show. How's it going there?
Thank you for having me. This is a treat for me, and I'm going to put you guys to work.
Excellent. And we've got Marcella, our co-host as well, smiling all the way from Denver.
That's right, all the way from sunny Denver, Colorado. And Aaron, you're on the East Coast in Raleigh, Durham. Is that right?
Yeah, Raleigh, North Carolina.
Cool.
Brilliant. So I guess we can get started with our episode today. Aaron, maybe we start with a brief introduction about how you got into M&A. And I know Marcel has been dying to ask a couple of questions on that front, but let's get the conversation going.
I started in the government, so almost the opposite of M&A. I started in law enforcement. I did some military contracting, so again, the opposite of M&A. And then I was feeling smothered by the government. And if anybody's ever worked for the government, they understand exactly what I'm talking about. So I made the jump to the private sector into software, a wonderful company where I had the opportunity to really take all that kind of pent up energy and creativity and just get loose into the software industry. And it was actually at that company that I learned about M&A and acquisitions and integrations. And it just took one for me to really get hooked on the idea. And I started out as a functional lead, mostly in support, some sales, some services, but really gained an appreciation for it there. And I think I was involved in 6 maybe at that company over a handful of years. And then transitioned to another company where I was leading the projects. So really got the full view. I was embedded in a consulting firm that was attached to kind of the board and learned a lot from them. They were true operators. So I absorbed as much as I could from them. And then it was either 12 or 13 that I did for that company, leading those projects over the course of 2 years. And then I hit, I'll share with this group, just because you guys and anybody who's interested in watching this will at some point experience the same. But about a year and a half ago, I hit I hate this point in my career. I hated everything about M&A integrations. They're always messes, disasters. I was terrible at it. Everything. I was thinking about going back to like more client care and, just client management, account management, and then started to get plugged into the M&A community, which some of our mutual friends, and then got connected with you guys as well. And that really rekindled my love for the exercise of M&A and integration especially. And from that moment, that was it. I was off and running, and I don't think I can do anything different ever again, to be honest with you. I have right now with the company I'm with, I carry a strategic programs title, and M&A is wrapped into that. So I get a taste of different projects around the company, maybe more related to transformation than just pure integration. But M&A and integration is always right below the surface.
That's awesome. Aaron, thank you so much for sharing your background with us. And I really loved how you shared about the M&A community. And yeah, it's so great to build those connections. I personally am so grateful that I had the opportunity to meet you. That was actually a year ago. Can you believe it? It was a year ago that we were taking Anirvan's amazing M&A integrations course. And we just had such a community that we built there, and a global community as well. So loved hearing that.
It's one of those, I didn't realize how few of us there were out there. Um, and with such a small community like that, there's not a ton of opportunity. You end up in kind of an echo chamber of your own work. So finding somebody who can be a sounding board, who's lived through some of the same scar tissue that you have, and just getting that gut check of, here's how I've been doing it for, X number of projects. What am I doing wrong? What have you done differently? There's such value to that. You don't feel like you're on an island anymore. So it was a handful of weeks, but man, like just how impactful it was to sit with a group of peers and be able to chat freely on a handful of Saturday mornings.
Yes, thank you, Anirvan. It was an amazing experience. I think you've gotten lots of great feedback from all the participants in the course.
And for me, it was awesome as well, because literally, as Aaron, you and Marcella, both of you are pointing out, which is essentially a lot of times you are in a state of wilderness where quite often you find yourself so alone, especially when you have corporate jobs with high impact, right? And the worst part is you can't ask anybody at work, because literally what that would mean is it could be construed in any number of ways, and you definitely don't want to be construed as somebody who does not know what the hell you're doing or not doing, right? And that's where this peer group, when you get people together who kind of in the same state of wilderness, you start exchanging ideas, and all of a sudden you find you're not the only one who's facing this problem. And that's actually the purpose, and that's what we also been striving to do with this Fifth Chrome Insights podcast as well, to grow that awareness. I know you guys also know Kisan Patel. I mean, he's doing a fabulous job of running his podcast, but also M&A Science and all that stuff. And then, of course, our other friend, Clint Kendrick, with his virtual HR M&A. So a few of us trying to do stuff just to build that community and help others. So I'm glad that you found value, and I'm glad that you continue to participate in our conversations.
Yeah, it's I found tremendous kind of selfish value for myself because it pulled me back in, but also my job touches, at this point, thousands of people who are going through a really kind of what can be a tumultuous time in their careers. So it's made me that much better, right? Being able to have some of those sounding boards. So yes, it's been a significant impact to me, but all the people that I'm able to touch in a more efficient way, or a more caring way, a more knowledgeable way, that value spreads out across all those people as well, who actually have a good integration experience. Like, what a rarity, right?
So what a big impact, right? From building the community to actually having an impact on those who are going through the acquisition and integration. So that is awesome. Aaron, you wanted to chat about, let's just jump in. You wanted to chat about reporting structures and sort of timing and approach, that cutover transition. So I wanted to just hear, because it sounded like you've had some time to think about and reflect on what you feel would be kind of the best timing and approach and consideration. So just turning it over to you to share your thoughts with us on that.
Yeah, so kind of, in the vein of sharing and opening up the black box of M&A and integration, a little bit of context around some of the projects that I touch. If we think about target size of like 100 million down to 0 million, right, that size, with an acquirer size of maybe 500 million and below. So you get in that sweet spot of 250 million of total deal size. And typically what I look at is everything except for preservation. So if we think about like transformation and like a true absorption or combination, that's really where I operate. So all my comments following will really exclude that preservation model. Also, the environment that I work in is I'm in-house, so I'm not a consultant, and I don't have a team. So I operate as a standalone kind of one-person show, and I borrow from the functional areas, and I draw my leads and my expertise from there. And that's a pretty standard model in the area where I operate, which is private equity or venture capital. And my experience has been that there are two ways to do an organization kind of org design cutover move. The default seems to be one way, and then a more progressive or kind of edgy way seems to be the second way. So I'll talk about both. The default is what I call the GM model, or it's a hold it and turn it over kind of model. And it stems from a question that usually comes from an executive at some point around who's going to run the business post-close. So you establish this GM and it kind of holds this acquired business as a single unit while this 90 to 180-day integration project runs in a vacuum or kind of tucked off to the side. You end up with this kind of integration dashboard approach, separate communication stream. There's matrix management all over the place. And I can get into maybe an example of that matrix management in a minute here. I've seen that be a little bit slower pace, right? There's hesitation built into this as you navigate that matrix management. Clarity, right? At some point, you'll find out that I basically have clarity tattooed on me because that drives everything. Through that matrix management, it's hard to maintain clarity of who's in charge, who's my boss, who's making the decisions, who's the ultimate whatever. There's also consensus making, which I'm sure somebody has a better term for it. I call it consensus making, which is when you have two managers in play, you have to sit them down in a room and say, we understand that you have your needs and you have your needs. Let's get to a decision, rather than establishing that single point of leadership who can just make a decision on the fly. And as a symptom of this approach or method comes this talk track around, once the integration is done, we'll take the organization and we'll integrate the organization into. And to me, that's the crux of it, is the statement of, we're going to wait until the integration is done before we start integrating. And that just feels a certain way to me, right? It's counterintuitive in a lot of ways. And this model, my claim is that you're actually solving for a problem that you create by doing this. You see the symptoms flow all the way down, even to tactical pieces like knowledge transfer. I've developed an airtight surgical kind of knowledge transfer process that's it's heavily coached. Why? Because it needs to be heavily coached in this GM model, right? You need to basically stand on top of people and remind them what they care about and what they should be looking for. And here's your dates and is it done? And it went. So that's the first model that I've seen, and that seems to be the default. The other one, which I defer to, is the day one cutover. And that is basically as an LOI hits, my first meeting is talking about org cutover with the target company and mapping out, here's how we are, we're functional, let me see your org chart. So that on day one, depending on the size of the company, and I'll be transparent about this, depending on the size of the company, you may have some transformation to do post integration or during integration. And I think of that as integration, transformation, optimization. But with that approach of a day one cutover, when you hand somebody their responsibilities and say, you own this company, a lot of the project planning that you have to get into with this GM model approach turns into more of a checklist, right? And it's more of guideposts, more of reminders, because a good leader taking over direct reports in a new company inherently knows what they care about to run the business. If they don't, you've got separate problems, right? But they have this inherent investment now, not just in the people, but the process. They care more about making things match, right? If I have to look at two different sales forces, or different CRMs, whatever it is, that's uncomfortable to me. So I want to move the process along, and I want to speed this process to make it comfortable for myself. So there's more of an inherent understanding of what needs to be done. So it becomes that checklist versus a plan. So go ahead, please.
Oh, no, just for a little bit more context. So with your day one cutover approach, typically, how many employees are you talking about here? And is there a threshold where you think maybe, a certain number is no longer feasible to utilize that approach?
So I promised to put you guys to work on this call, and that was my question number 2, is where does this break down? I've done it with employees numbering in the hundreds. So I know it can be done up to at least that threshold. I find that it's harder to do with smaller companies. So give me a company with 8 employees where everybody's wearing all the hats, and try to break them out into a functionalized company where marketing is different than product. That's more difficult to do because you bring over job functions into an area where it doesn't belong. And that's where you get more heavily into this transformation exercise of starting to draw that out and maybe bring in backfills to split some of these job roles out. But give me a kind of a mid-size company, 50 to 100 million, that's semi-functionalized or broken out a little bit more with scale. I've seen it continue to add speed. So my question to you is, number one, have you seen both approaches, or is this completely new territory? And where do you think it breaks down? Could a Cisco-sized acquisition do a day one cutover with an org structure, knowing that transformation may come? Or is there an inherent ceiling on where that's going to fall apart?
My sort of initial thoughts are, I think it depends on a couple of factors. So one would be the timing, right? The timing from when the agreement is reached versus when the intended close / day one would be. So do we have enough runway, enough time to actually go through that org and like understand what are the different functions in this organization, what are the roles, how many people, and sort of go through the process and make the decisions? Because what if we have 2 marketing teams, 2 HR teams, 2 finance teams? We've got like overlap. So kind of is there sufficient timing to kind of work through all that and understand how those individuals in the target organization would align into the new organization, and how to handle, like, what is the decision around where there are overlapping roles? How is that going to be handled and cared for? So I think it's kind of twofold around like the timing and the decision making within that specified time. And if you can get all of that, you can kind of get to done on that, get to the outcome before the anticipated close. You then also need to kind of communicate that and make sure everybody is clear on that. And, if there's sort of like anything you need to handle from a legal perspective, make sure kind of that's all handled. But I think that it is a desirable situation if you're able to get to that. And I'm not directly answering your question, but just kind of throwing out there, right? If you can get alignment and go through that process within the time frame that you have, then kudos to you. And then, if you can't within that process, then maybe coming up with, well, how much more time do you need post-close to get to that desired outcome?
Yeah, you danced around it a little bit. Kind of in between the lines there is my reality, which is done properly. By the time we close, my job is 90% done on the integration. After that, it's just systems that has to go and some cultural kind of alignment and making sure that people are really not just check the box pulled into teams, but really pulled into teams at kind of a feed your soul level. So yes, all of that is true. And also when I've missed, yes, I set a date. It's usually 3 weeks out or something like that post-close, where maybe there was some diligence that we couldn't quite get into for reason X or reason Y. But I set it on the calendar and all my leads know that this is the cutover date. and everybody goes at once. I will fight tooth and nail against a phased cutover where marketing is ready to go into marketing and sales is a couple of weeks later. It just leads to some of the uncertainty of like, well, they got new managers. How come I didn't get a new manager? Am I on the way out, right? So it's, if we need extra time because we failed pre-close, we will hit that secondary date and everybody goes at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Plus one.
Yeah, I'm just loving the conversation here. So, yeah, Marcella, go ahead. You wanted to ask something.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I plus one to everything you just shared. And I do think that it is the most beneficial when all of that communication can happen at the same time so that everybody knows, you know, what the future state will be at the same time. To your earlier point, right? Oh, this group is hearing back and our group hasn't, can just create some uncertainty and some anxiety that, you know, isn't necessarily helpful. The thing that I wanted to throw out there, which kind of, you know, I was just thinking about is, I think that in the situation where the acquiring organization is like a really large, you know, organization, I wonder if sometimes in those organizations, there's sort of this like layer of what are the other competing priorities in addition to this particular M&A, because you need alignment around the decision. And so I kind of wonder if organizations that have a lot of other competing priorities alongside their M&A might take a little bit more, like it might take more time for those organizations to actually align on the org structure. And they might just inherently need a little bit more time if the M&A isn't their top #1 priority that they're working on.
Yes, and I think it's a poor excuse. Maybe that's a little self-centered, but there is nothing more impactful. I'm about to preach to the choir. There's nothing more impactful to either the acquiring organization or the acquired organization than an M&A activity, right? Aside from maybe preservation. And even at that, that can be a really significant event as well. So I think the argument there is if you are not in a space as an organization where you can't make this a high enough priority to get to clear decisions on what you're going to do with the people that you acquire, don't acquire a company, right? Wait until Q3 when you clear up some space. Now, again, that may break down. You know, at some point when you get up into some of your supersized companies, it's a different ecosystem that I think has to be addressed separately. But in this sweet spot, which is really where my context comes from, if you can't focus on it, don't do it, because it's going to fail before you even close.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just reflecting on the couple of scenarios that you talked about, Aaron. First one was what you called integration, transformation, and optimization, and the second one was the kind of day one cutover, right? So one of the things that I've seen is that it typically, yeah, it doesn't matter, especially the large companies, they tend to have like a checklist-based, a templatized-based version of what an integration should be. And they just go through it like robots, right? So it's like, hey, you know what, you need to give access rights, you need to give set emails, you need to secure their firewalls, et cetera, right? The second thing is you want to secure their money, all the financials, all of that stuff. So it's a process that a lot of companies just go through it because they have to without asking questions. It's almost like the gospel truth. You should not question anybody, you just go through the motion, right? But while going through the motion, they also unearth a lot of other opportunities which were never unearthed during the due diligence and otherwise. And that's where the true value creation comes in that integration phase that you talked about, right? And this is where a large number of companies miss the boat. Why? Because they think integration is over. The moment the 100 days or 180 days are done, integration is over. Hey, because I've given Marcella a new email ID and she's got a new laptop with new image, a new brand, et cetera, and my integration is done. No, it doesn't. Integration actually happens when people are integrated in their minds, they're integrated from their jobs, they're integrated culturally, they're integrated from an operational perspective, all of that, right? The second thing is, and which is what you pointed out, which is different functions tend to have almost acquired different speed at which they want to integrate themselves, right? The sales guys may want to take forever because they want to protect their turfs. The HR guys just want to get the work done, say, hey, give the whole damn world the same email IDs, right? But the reality is all of them need to work in sync. The challenge comes in is how do you define something, a purpose that will drive the synchronization, okay? And over the years, I've seen few things count. First is what we call a future operating state, right? And funnily enough, especially since last year that I've been doing this training, I've realized that there is something called business model canvas, which had been using in the past, but hadn't seen a lot of actual usage of that during an integration. And then, I started using it in my integrations, and I've seen some of the other practitioners do the same. And this is one version of what an integration is going to be, which is what's going to be the value proposition, what's going to be the customers. So the entire process of cross-selling and upselling gets captured in a business model canvas. Once you get that, then you'll be able to subordinate what does the marketing team needs to do on the basis of this? What does the sales team need to do on the basis of this? What does the operations team need to do on this, right? So that's one. The second one is, which is kind of an extension of the business model canvas, which we call the operating model, which incidentally is based on 6 pillars: processes, organization structure, location, information management, suppliers, and management systems that govern your target operating model, that govern your organization structure and all of that. And then the rest of the organization, the rest of the integration would be part of the subordinated to this, right? So that's your second. And the third one is the culture, right? So we spoke about this. Remember Grinder's curve, as you said, entrepreneurial companies, they're going to be small, 8 people doing everything compared to where you have delegated, you've got functional stuff, so Grinder's curve and then Cameron Quinn's competing value framework. I mean, these kind of nicely sum it up for you. Okay, if I need to be market facing, competing in the market, I need to have a certain kind of organizational value. If I need to be in command and control, typically the large companies tend to be in that space. So that's what. So once you have these things in place, and the first version doesn't have to be hundreds of pages. The first version of these 3 templates could be just a few pages each. That once you have that, you can have a very smooth day one cut over. That's the second part. But if you don't have that, people will be guessing, hey, maybe this, maybe that. Let's go ahead and look at the template.
It's somebody smarter than me told me that on day one, people really only want to know 3 things: is do I still have a job? Who's my manager, and what's the plan? So nobody on day one is absorbing a full operating model and what the grand plan is and all the levers that we're going to pull. They want the 3 bullets of, is the product going away? Are we dumping the customers, whatever it is? Just what are the broadest strokes to let me know directionally what's about to happen in my life and my career? So I think a lot of that goes into, a ton of work goes into that. I think the go-to-market feeds that quite a bit. That's an area that is always passed or can be passed over quite a bit, is the go-to-market, all the way down to like the cross-sell, the enablement, the timing, all that. But if you can boil it down to 3 bullet points on a slide and show people, here's what it's going to be, that starts building in that clarity, and everything else starts to make sense. You also said something interesting about a check the box project plan, which I don't want to fly over. Yes, right. When I remember when I started, which feels like a million years ago, and it wasn't, somebody handed me an Excel sheet and said, here's how you integrate a company, right? After doing a handful of that way, I realized the true kind of golden state of integration is no project plan. So I fell into the scaled agile model, and that's how I run now. And as I fell into a kind of a routine and a groove with some of my regular integration function leads, we looked at the project plan less and less. Instead, we focused on some of those operating model, really the goals and objectives of the project, and said, are we doing the right thing? You know, some of it is very tactical. Legal has a checklist that they have to do, so we refer back to the checklist. But a lot of the commercial stuff is more directional. And as long as we maintain the same conversation in the same direction, we can get there and we can go back and refer to a project plan more like a checklist to make sure if we missed anything. Is there anything that fell to the back burner that we need to go back for? But rather than focusing on this waterfall approach of an integration plan, it's more of a conversation of what are we supposed to be doing?
Absolutely, and you know, the point that you raised is actually a very valid point, and which gets asked on day one, right? Do I have a job? What's going to be the future of my, you know? And the thing is, even with these templates that I spoke about, the framework that I spoke about, it's not necessarily going to give you an answer on day one, but using the operating model the way it should be, not the, you know, the generic operating model that people talk about, but target operating model and the business model canvas and the go-to-market strategy, all of that is going to give you that answer sooner than later. You know, so once you've done through that exercise, you may have clear direction in maybe 15 days after day one or 7 days after day one, but without them, you'd still be sort of, you know, running around in misty conditions. So that's that. Now, you know, kind of moving on, because I also realized that this is I was looking at the watch that you know, when you having a good conversation, it kind of you just love it. What are some of the challenges? I think Marcelo, you spoke about that. In an organization, based on the last so many years that you spend in M&A and M&A integration, for somebody who's starting out their career in M&A integration, right? So what would be a good starting point for them? You know, because it doesn't seem to be you know, a standard answer, but what would be, in your opinion, would be a best place to get started?
I think you start years before you start, right? I think one of the reasons that I've gotten even to as good as I am, which I still put myself on the lousy end of the spectrum because there's just so much to do and so much to know, is moving around just in your career. Different kinds of companies, different function areas, right? The more you know about, you know, I hate to talk about silos, but the more you know about a variety of silos, you can start to feel how they're connected. So rather than having to push down all these tactical kind of checklist items through a project plan, you understand which direction you have to push the snowball off the top of the hill to get it to just roll itself. So I think moving around in a company and getting exposure to different functions, especially if it's outside your comfort zone, that's where I would start.
I think that's a great insight for, you know, in fact, most of the senior executives needs to go through these different, let's say, different aspects or different components of an employment. It enriches their employment experience. What do you think, Marcella?
Yeah, thanks, Anirban. So I was actually thinking back to something that Aaron had said earlier, where some folks think, okay, we got to close day one, like we're almost done with this integration. You know, like folks are enabled with laptops and they're in our technology, all of our systems, we're done, hands off. And so it just makes me think, you know, it just kind of underscores, I feel like really 12 months post-close, you know, like 1 year post-close is kind of a good timeline to just keep checking in with employees, like have a feedback loop. Maybe it's, you know, a quarterly survey, or through those all hands that have a feedback loop where employees can give feedback on the integration and what their experience is. And then keep an eye on attrition, right? Like we are doing this deal for a reason, and we want to make sure that we're achieving, you know, the outcomes that we set out to achieve. And in most cases, that employee population is really crucial and critical to achieving that value of the deal. So I feel like keeping an eye on attrition and having some kind of cadence, recurring cadence where you're seeing, what does our attrition look like? What are people saying from our feedback loops, from our surveys? How are people feeling? And, making sure to take that extra effort to be inclusive of these acquired colleagues. So they had their previous all hands cadence. And if they were a startup, maybe it was like every week they had an all hands stand up. And maybe now in a larger organization, it's once a month or every 6 weeks or every quarter or what have you. So let's find all the ways to be inclusive, now that they're joining those all hands and now that they're embedded into the organization, what are their leaders doing to make them feel included and that they're really part of this organization and that they see how the two organizations are really better together. So I kind of feel like, just commenting on that earlier question, oh, we're done. Like there's actually quite a lot of work to do to really, preserve that value and the outcomes that you want to see.
Yeah, and I think I heard it, but I'll maybe layer on top of it is as an integrator, I'm opposed genetically to the concept of this integration dashboard, and that may be controversial. So in the same way, I'm opposed to this, to a survey going out to a group of employees to tell me about your integration. I do like one survey that can go out to the entire company and get a pulse on the entire heartbeat of the whole company, because you may acquire a small company that is pleased as punch 12 months later, but they are driving the rest of the company nuts. So I don't want to know how happy that acquisition is. I want to know how happy your whole organization is after that acquisition integration. There's a couple ways to slice and dice that and make sure that your population is, that you're not missing something, forest for the trees. But when I default to something, I default to sending out one to everybody. And I, just to be clear, I don't think you said something different than that, but it spoke to me enough to say, don't if it's integrated and they're part of the company, treat the whole company the same.
That's a very interesting dynamics. I just saw there. So one survey, and at the same time, and I was just thinking that Marcella being, she has this responsibility of employee experience. How does one, and again, I'm just asking this question, literally on the move. How does one capture meaningful information about employees during this period of time? What are they feeling about the integration? If you can't do a survey, what are some of the other mechanisms that can be used?
Yeah. Well, to the point about the survey, I love the one survey. You can actually, if you wanted to, you could tack on a few additional questions that only go to the acquired colleagues. That way you can see their responses to those specific questions. And then, but more broadly, you can look, and so maybe you say, I believe that this organization is a great place to work, and that everybody's getting that question. Everybody's getting the same set of questions about the organization. And then there's just a couple additional ones that you could layer in there. And then getting back to your question, Anirvan, I think you can have, there should be a feedback loop, a way where folks can, maybe it's like sending an email to an alias or raising it to their manager, but there should definitely be a way for folks to share their feedback or any questions that they have. And it should kind of be like a recurring loop where then the integration team is getting that and they can see, okay, looks like we've got a lot of folks that are sharing the same thing. We should really make an adjustment and take action on that. Versus, if it's like just one or two, but if you're really getting a lot of the same feedback over and over again, then
it's a good call out. I also drift away from the big bang approach of like, okay, we did our 90 days, here's your one survey. That constant feedback loop, we have an engagement tool that we use for the whole company where we can pack in some of those questions. So we get it in kind of a more agile format so we can adjust on the fly if needed.
Based on the learning that you've had so far over the last 6, 7 years, 8 years, what are some of the books that kind of inspired you, that kind of helped you along the way to learn your skills, both on integration as well as on leadership?
So The Advantage by Pat Lencioni is the one. That's what I default to. It is at its core all about driving clarity and building trust and accountability through an organization. It's if anybody who gets a hold of this recording hasn't, it's a quick read. It's more of a manual. It's something that on the exec team that I sit on now, we pull it out as a reference guide, and we frequently refer back to it. If we're stuck on a question, what would the advantage say, right? Or if we get into a spot where we have to hold each other accountable, what would the advantage say? Is this in line with the advantage? Pat Lencioni has some other great books out there as well, but The Advantage is really the go-to manual. There's nothing different about an acquisition integration that doesn't apply to the larger organization or the core organization, however you want to define it, or the pre-transaction organization. So defaulting back to the advantage, I would give you that one. I've got some other ones that I can share with you after, but I think that's really most pertinent to this conversation.
Brilliant. In fact, what we'll do is we'll put the links of the books that you would recommend in the description box of the podcast as well as the YouTube, because a lot of our viewers, listeners, I mean, they want to know, what keeps Aaron ticking or what keeps Marcella ticking. So let's get what have been the reading? I still haven't gone to that stage where we start asking what did you have for breakfast, but at least what do you guys read to get inspired and to learn? So that's good. And dysfunctions, I love Pat Lencioni's the dysfunction of a team book. I mean, that's been
I didn't realize you were going to ask, but it's actually sitting right here,
right
on my desk, because we go to it so much. It's a tremendously valuable resource. Black coffee is the answer. Breakfast. That's what I had for breakfast, is black coffee.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron, for sharing those pieces of information. I appreciate that.
It will also be my lunch, if that's the next question. Black coffee for lunch.
No, I just wanted to say, so related to the books, just curious to know if there might be any tools or templates that you found to be really helpful in your work that you wanted to share.
Yeah, so tools, not Excel. I've worked in every tool that you can imagine as far as project management tools go. Anything that's easily shareable technology-wise. There are some that require everybody to have the same email address already. As you can imagine, by knowing me for as long as you've known me, I require that my IT team get our new employees into email addresses as quickly as humanly possible. But if there's a delay, especially with international transactions, I want to have a tool where I can get people in and working collaboratively as quickly as possible, like day one, quickly. So really any brand of tool that does that. Templates, I've developed my own set, or let me restate that. I've worked with brilliant professionals across handfuls of projects to develop a cohesive set of knowledge transfer documents. Those are valuable checklists. What are the things that a particular professional may want to ask about post-transaction? My standard DRL kind of templates that I use. I have a standard project plan that is subtractive more than additive. I treat it as a backlog. So I pack everything into there that I possibly could. Including things around like works council, right? If I'm strictly domestic, I'm not going to need that. So I just drop it out at the beginning of every deal. But I do have a pretty comprehensive checklist. And it started just like everybody else's. It started with a template that somebody handed me several years ago.
Aaron, DRL? What was
data request list.
Nice. Thank you. Awesome. Aaron, thank you for everything that you shared. This was really amazing. It was really insightful to learn from all of your experiences. I did want to ask, if you have any final thoughts, parting thoughts that you wanted to share with anyone who might be listening.
Yeah. So final thoughts. I want to be diplomatic about this. I think so it's kind of a black box, right? The whole M&A world is a little bit of a black box. The banking side of it, the transaction side, is less of a black box. When people hear M&A, they hear two things. They hear, oh yeah, banking guys and they're buying companies, or they hear George Clooney up in the air. They miss the entire kind of middle piece of it. So final thought is know that that's out there. It's a critically important piece, not just to the people that we impact, but also the businesses, right? You look at the statistics about blown value in deals, like that's where it comes as the middle piece. And if you're looking to get into it, start with the community. So I know somewhere out there, somebody is sitting in an ops role, right? Or a distribution or a logistics role, and they've heard kind of the edges of what M&A can be. Start with the community, get plugged in, even if you don't feel like you belong there, and just talk to people, because that gives you that breadth of understanding of what it could be. Start there and then fall in love with it. How's that? Good?
I love that. I love that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so
Brilliant.
much, Aaron. This has just been amazing. So thanks to everyone also who's listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel or any of the different podcasts. And Aaron, how many are there? 7 or 8?
8. This is always a confusion point, right? So 8 channels, so podcast channels, and including Apple, Spotify, and Google. I actually listened to the podcast once we release it on Apple while driving my kids to his school. And it feels actually, every time I hear them, it just feels energized, right? So, Aaron, this has been awesome. If people want to stay in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably the best way. I think I have my contact information on there as well, but feel free to reach out, right? I preach it, but I live it as well. So if somebody's interested and they just want to know more, I'm happy to chat with it. I do, as you can imagine, Marcella, I do some my coffee hangouts with people who are just interested. They want to talk about it, or sounding board. So I'm always up for a coffee.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. And as Marcella, you've already said it, if you like this episode, guys, please hit the like button. And if you want to hear more M&A stories, don't forget to subscribe. And then if there's anything else, if you want to have a coffee with Aaron, be his guest, or if you want to learn more about M&A and M&A integration, get in touch with Marcella or me or any of our guests, including Aaron. So this was wonderful. So with that, we would like to wrap up the session today. I wish you guys all a very happy weekend and the rest of the week. And till next time with another story. Till then, bye-bye.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And if you liked the episode, I'm sure you'll also like our latest new tool. It is a quick assessment scorecard to assess the robustness of your M&A integration design. It just takes less than 5 minutes to answer. It is for free and you get an instantaneous recommendation. So visit maintegrationplan.scoreapp.com and find out for yourself. maintegrationplan.scoreapp.com. Bye-bye.